clay and sand were mined from the hill, clay for pitchers and sand for glass making. It was also a lookout for merchant ships coming up the Chesapeake Bay. The homes in this neighborhood were those of sea captains and merchants.
Look at that. Is it a houseboat?
At the base of the Federal Hill, you will notice the memorial mast for the Pride of Baltimore, a reproduction of the 19th century Baltimore clipper ship built in 1976 to sail the globe as a goodwill ambassador for Baltimore and Maryland. During her 9 years at sea, she logged more than 150,000 nautical miles, the equivalent of circling the globe 6 times. On May 14, 1986, Pride of Baltimore was struck by a squall near Puerto Rico, and within minutes, the schooner sank. The ship, her captain, and 3 crew members were lost at sea. In 1988, Pride of Baltimore II was built, 50% larger, and with modern safety devices, and serves as a sailing memorial to the original Pride. The area to our right was once the site of the Bethlehem Steel propeller yards. For many years, Bethlehem Steel was among the leading steel-producing companies in America. During much of the 20th century, the company operated multiple locations in Baltimore as a part of a successful shipbuilding operation, highlighted by the construction of over 300 World War II Liberty ships. In recent years, the site on our right has been revitalized and home to upscale condominium and row home communities, a common theme along the waterfront all around the harbor.
Let me know if you want any pictures or have any questions.
The mid-rise buildings with the dark shingles on the top-level exterior are the Ritz-Carlton Residences, a 210-unit complex completed in 2008. Units range in size from 1,600 to 5,000 square feet, with private elevators, 24/7 support services, a private movie theater, underground parking, full-service spa, and a marina. The Ritz-Carlton has had an array of famous residents, both in the past and presently. Many pro football and baseball players reside here, being that both the Ravens and Orioles stadiums are close by. Debbie Phelps is one owner, and while her name might not sound too familiar, you might recognize her son's name, Michael Phelps, a Baltimore native known for his incredible competitive swimming talents. He is the most successful and highly decorated Olympian in the history of the Summer Games, with a total of 28 medals, 23 of which are gold. Another recognizable former resident is Tom Clancy, the famous book author who wrote Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and The Hunt for Red October. Clancy was also a minority owner of the Baltimore Orioles. In 2009, he purchased multiple adjacent units inside the Ritz-Carlton to make a sprawling 12,000 square foot penthouse. At the time of his death, his house went on the market for $12 million.
Yeah, exactly.
Just beyond the Ritz-Carlton residence is a soaring complex known as Harbor View. Built atop the old Bethlehem Steel Shipyard dry dock, the 29-story tower is surrounded by water on 3 sides, providing each residence with spectacular views. On our right front, you can spot a green 100-foot-tall crane. This whirly crane, so named for its ability to turn 360 degrees, was used to repair battle-worn ships during World War II. The crane currently overlooks the waterfront entrance to the Baltimore Museum of Industry, a non-profit organization focused on the collection and preservation of Maryland's industrial heritage and legacy. This site was once the historic Platt & Company oyster cannery, built in 1865. It was one of over 100 canneries situated on and around the city's harbor, and is the last one standing. Who hasn't heard of Domino Sugar? The sign, perched high over the Baltimore Harbor, has been an iconic part of the city's history for over 70 years. The original neon sign was among the largest on the East Coast, at over 70 feet tall. Overall, it's comparable in size to a basketball court, and the dot over the letter I is about 6.5 feet tall, or the average height of a professional basketball player. In 2021, the steel letters were replaced with aluminum due to decades of deterioration from weather, while the neon interior was restored with LED lighting. The new sign has greater brightness, clarity, and consumes significantly less energy. Whereas the old neon sign consumed 25,000 kilowatts of power per hour, the new one only uses 1,300 kilowatts. This specific sugar refinery is the largest in the eastern U.S., processing 585,000 tons of raw sugar a year. Every 4 to 6 days, ships arrive from South America, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Florida coasts to offload raw sugar. The two blue gantry cranes seen here are used for the transfer of sugar to the factory via large clamshell buckets. These buckets dip down into the hull of the sugar ship, scooping up 500 pounds of sugar, dumping it into the blue hoppers, where it's then funneled onto a conveyor belt that leads up into the factory. The offloading process, at about 10 million pounds per day, usually takes about a week. If the wind is blowing just right, you can smell the sweet scent of toasted sugar in the air. Is just after Domino. The point is so named as it was the home of Procter & Gamble, makers of Tide, Cheer, Ivory, Dawn, and Joy. It has been completely renovated and is now the corporate campus of Under Armour. Under Armour is a Maryland-based company founded in 1996 by a University of Maryland football player, Kevin Plank, who developed the original fabric for his shirts. He started with a small business loan in the late 1980s, and now Under Armour is one of the largest sports apparel companies in the world, sponsoring some of the top athletes worldwide. The 3 tidal tanks you see here, which are still used to store molasses, celebrate our own Baltimore sports legends, Michael Phelps, Cal Ripken Jr., and Ray Lewis.
So these tidal tanks are going to be a little bit farther up on our right-hand side. They currently contain molasses. That's another one of our bulk cargoes here at the Port of Baltimore. Some of our other bulk cargoes, like as we just talked about, are raw sugar. We also get scrap metal, asphalt, rock salt, and automobiles. Under Armour revitalized, or Kevin Plank put his Under Armour headquarters right here. The owner of Under Armour sort of revitalized this point here called Tide Point. You can see 3 of these famous sports stars here on the tidal tanks, and those all contain molasses currently.
Ellis Island in New York Harbor is well known as the main entry point for European immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What many do not know is that Baltimore was the second leading port of entry at that time. Over 1 million immigrants from European nations arrived in Baltimore in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Blocks and blocks of row homes were quickly erected to accommodate these new arrivals who moved into neighborhoods with fellow nationalities. Thus, Baltimore became a city with many ethnic neighborhoods and cultures, which it remains today. Also along the waterfront is the Immigration Center Memorial. The waterfront building that served as the actual immigration center still stands today, and we'll point it out a little later. Back on our right is a community known as Locust Point, named for the locust trees growing on the peninsula. Many of the streets built here during the latter half of the 19th century bear the names of local heroes from the War of 1812. The large, tall structure with the modern glass facade is the old Baltimore and Ohio grain terminal. Constructed in 1923, it was the biggest and fastest grain elevator in the U.S. It jutted 290 feet into the air. The grain terminal was the pulse of the world's agricultural market in the new age of industrialism. Every year, nearly 10 miles of conveyor belt carried 3.8 million bushels of grain from rail cars to transatlantic cargo ships. These vessels transported the grain to ports all over the world. In typical Baltimore style, it has been rehabbed, and today the 24-story tower houses luxury condominiums and is called Silo Point, again respecting its industrial heritage. The large gray ships, Deanvola and Antares, are named after two of the brightest.
I'm going to pause that track for a second, guys, while we get a little bit farther up. We're going to be able to see some rock salt coming up on the right-hand side. We've got a tanker barge here as well. We'll be up to the fort in just a couple of minutes, so we'll also be able to see what's left of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. So if anybody's been wanting to see that, this will be a good time for pictures here in just a couple of minutes. Keep on cruising out to Fort McHenry, and then make our turn back up there. We'll talk about some more interesting things about the harbor in a couple minutes.
As we pass along the piers on our right, you'll find another example of imported bulk cargo, rock salt. The large salt mounds at the end of the seawall, which can sometimes be piled as high as a 10-story building, is shipped to Baltimore from as far away as the Atacama Desert in Chile and from the Baja Salt Flats in Mexico. The Port of Baltimore handles about 1 million tons of salt per year used for de-icing applications of residential driveways and sidewalks to local roads, bridges, and interstate highways during our wet winters. An interesting fact about the Port of Baltimore is that it's a little over 100 miles inland, or west, than any other port on the East Coast. The reason why that's significant is keeping cargo on a ship for longer before transferring to land greatly reduces shipping costs. Most products going to the Midwest come through the Port of Baltimore. Baltimore City's fireboats are stationed here at the edge of Fort McHenry on Locust Point. This facility has been in use since 1917, when it was established for Engine Company 39. Today, the Marine Division operates one large fireboat with a crew of 5 and 2 small fire and rescue boats, each with a crew of 2, manned full-time at Baltimore's only remaining fireboat station. The small brick building is now a Naval Reserve Training Center. Mentioned earlier, this building used to be the Immigration Center, where immigrants arrived and were processed in the same fashion as those at Ellis Island in New York. The grassy area at the end of Locust Point is Fort McHenry. It is named for James McHenry, who served with George Washington during the Revolutionary War. During the War of 1812, it was the only protection for Baltimore. In September of 1814, British ships had already burned Washington, D.C., and had pledged to take Baltimore and clean out what the British referred to as that nest of pirates on the Chesapeake. British troops landed a few miles away at North Point and attempted to capture Baltimore. On September 13, 1814, the bombardment of Fort McHenry began. A young attorney, Francis Scott Key, had been called to negotiate the release of a hostage being held by the British on a neutral vessel. He was successful, and the hostage was released, but the British detained Key on board. The battle continued through the stormy night of rain, thunder, and lightning. Key could not tell who was winning or if the fort had survived. Early on the morning of September 14th, he heard the morning gun at the fort and knew it had resisted the British. He saw British ships sailing out of the river, and as he looked out from the ship, he saw the largest American flag ever made, 30 by 42 feet, flying over the fort. The young poet sat down and composed 4 verses called The Defense of Fort McHenry, later set to music and renamed the Star-Spangled Banner. It became our official national anthem in 1931. The spot where Key wrote the poem on the British ship is now memorialized by a red, white, and blue buoy near the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
I remember that.
So we can start to see what's left of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. On the left-hand side, they have reopened that entire shipping channel to its original width of 600 feet and a depth of 50 feet. This allows even the largest of cruise ships and commercial vessels to pass through and into the port of Baltimore. While that channel was closed for the following months after the bridge's collapse, there was an estimated $15 million lost in profits each and every day to the port that the channel was closed. As all of the bulk cargo ships were not able to come in and offload cargo or unload cargo and take it elsewhere. We'll be making our turn here. The narration again will pick up on the right-hand side, talking about the large gray vessels on the right.
Yeah, I visited him there. Yeah.
There it's not.
So, high school class. Yeah. You're interested in history. You're interested in history.
I bet we won't see it. Unless it's that one. It's not. It's the one that goes nowhere.
Oh,
That's like
wow.
stops at the end. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the right hand side of it.
Whoa. That's crazy.
On the right, the ships you see here are Navy ro-ros, used for the transport of tanks, helicopters, wheeled vehicles, and other heavy equipment to support deployed forces worldwide. You can identify that these are Navy vessels by the blue and gold stripes painted on the smokestacks.
I think my dad came into Baltimore at the end of his because he was supposed to be done and then they needed a petty officer.
The neighborhood of Canton is yet another example of the extraordinary renaissance. That is Baltimore's adaptive reuse and development. It was named by the Baltimore captain John O'Donnell, an 18th century trader whose 2,000-acre estate was named for the port, Canton, China. During the 18th century, wharfs, piers, shipyards, and warehouses were built all along the waterfront. Swift and elegant topsail schooners, known as Baltimore Clippers, were built here during the first part of the 19th century. So named for their speed, these sailing ships were the fastest ships on the high seas. With 2 masts and a narrow hull, they created enough speed to earn the nickname the Yankee Racehorse. Clipper ships were heavily used in both trade and battle for many years. As you look off far into the basin on our front right side, you can check out one of Baltimore's coolest revitalized communities, Brewers Hill, a historic renovation of 2 landmark breweries, the Gunther Brewery and the National Brewery, the latter being home to the renowned Natty Bo, Baltimore's famous one-eyed, handlebar, mustachioed, round face that has been an icon here since the 1950s. The project has come to include over 30 acres of office, retail, and residential space, continuing to transform one of the city's most recognizable landmarks into a vibrant business and residential community. The large red brick building you see on the waterfront is Tin Deco, named after the Tin Decorating Company, one of the many factories which found their home in Canton. Tin Deco was built in 1914 and refurbished into apartments in 1986. The wharf located on the west side of the building once allowed for sheet metal to be delivered via ship from the Bethlehem Steel Plant located in Sparrows Point. The Tin Decorating Company was unique in the sense that it was completely self-sufficient. Everything was completed within the confines of the factory until the finished products were shipped away. From mixing paints in-house to a self-contained power plant, they even had their very own 24-hour on-site doctors and surgeons. The grassy area along the waterfront includes the Korean War Memorial, which was built in 1990 and is dedicated to the more than 500 Marylanders who fought and died in the Korean War. The beautiful twin gold spires you see inland are part of the historic St. Casimir's Roman Catholic Church, Built in Canton by Polish immigrants, the twin bell towers have an exterior made of limestone and stand 110 feet tall. In 1926, the church's design was commemorated as the most significant architectural improvement to Baltimore at that time. You can see the beautiful gold-top spires, which are part of St. Michael the Archangel Ukrainian Catholic Church, with its famous onion-bulb spires. It took almost 3 years to put the 45 tons of copper on the wood frames by hand and top it with 24-karat gold leaf. To the left of the gold spires, you will see a hill with trees and a pagoda with a flagpole. Today, this is Patterson Park, but back in 1814, it was called Hempstead Hill. This is as far as the British got when they landed back at North Point, by Key Bridge, and moved inland to take Baltimore. Where those trees are now is where local militia and the young American colonial army stopped the advance of the British. We are now approaching the neighborhood of Fells Point. William Fell came to the point and named it after himself in the early 1700s. He began shipbuilding there, and by 1800, this area was the shipbuilding center of Baltimore. During the War of 1812, some of the first vessels commissioned for the U.S. Navy were manufactured here. Fell's family named many of these cobblestone streets after those in England: Fleet Street, Thames, and Shakespeare Streets. Fells Point is one of the oldest seaports on the East Coast and the first area to be settled in Baltimore. This is where trading ships unloaded and loaded cargo heading to Europe, and why many of the streets in Baltimore are constructed of cobblestones. Cobblestones were used as ship ballast in the early sailing days, and were unloaded in heaps before being replaced with goods and raw materials. With a lively port and plentiful employment, the neighborhood served as home for many immigrants. However, after the Civil War, the neighborhood soon fell into decline. Today, it is a vibrant community home to many restaurants, taverns, bars, and pubs, which attract the young adults of Baltimore. Warehouses that once housed grain and coffee, among many other things, now house offices, condos, and shops. Henderson's Wharf. The 7-story red brick building to the right was an old tobacco warehouse. Now part of the thoughtful redevelopment of Baltimore's waterfront, it was transformed into condominiums and a hotel while still maintaining its historic charm with exposed brick throughout.
Floating in space. 3 years in space. I'm talking about.
Oh, there, okay.
He's looking at you.
The natty bro. That's what it is. Yeah. The circle with the mustache. Well, it's behind there. It's pretty cool. Yeah, it was. If anybody wants to go up top, you're welcome to. No pressure. But got a nice breeze. Should we go to the breeze?
There he is, still looking at us. Can you let Skylar know I got her call from the cops and I'm on the way?
City Pier, or Wreck Pier as it's known to locals, at the end of Broadway Street in the heart of historic Fells Point, was originally a city recreation pier which opened in 1914 and held one of the oldest dance halls in America. Over the years, developers tried to transform the 100-year-old pier. However, many struggled to find financing for the large-scale restoration projects. It was the founder of Under Armour, Kevin Plank, who took on the pier's extensive renovation. Rooted in tradition but reimagined, he used this prime overwater location to build a beautiful 128-suite hotel reflecting a bygone era with a modern-day sensibility and aesthetic called Sagamore Pendery Baltimore Hotel.
So there's your Under Armour. Go back to the single beds.
Get out. Little refrigerator, microwave.
Oh, these I don't think you're allowed.
No microwave, no little refrigerator.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, because I went to like tea code. And
The-
they were like, no, you can't have it.
Yeah, guy, we live on macaroni and cheese. That little mac and cheese that goes right there. That's what he is.
Every night.
Yeah, that's all he is. Cheese.
Like, how long was it going to about powdered cheese? It's from store.
If you make it real good, it's so good. If you make it half, it's absolutely.
Have you ever had any part of mac and cheese? I think probably would have been too quick for them. Maybe. Those are like Chanel cheese, but they have a
The old building with the rounded corners is now the home of the Frederick Douglass Isaac Myers Maritime Museum. It includes a repair facility for historic vessels run by living classrooms, and it honors the two historically important African Americans whose name it bears. Frederick Douglass lived here as a slave and escaped to freedom in 1838. And Isaac Myers opened Baltimore's first African American-owned shipyard after the Civil War. The building, once known as the Sugar House, served as the Levering & Co. coffee warehouse just after the Civil War. It is the oldest remaining industrial waterfront building in Baltimore. Fun fact, the reason this building has no sharp corners is due to the owner's belief that it would help spirits flow through the home without getting snagged. This was supposedly done in an effort to allow spirits to travel unhindered through the house, as corners have often been thought to hide ghosts. As we come alongside, we can see the living classrooms. The first sailing vessel you see is the Lady Maryland, a replica of two-masted punky schooner used in the early 1900s to haul produce from as far away as the Bahamas to Bermuda. The colors of pink and green were used to designate that this vessel regularly carried watermelons. The vessel you see on the other side of the dock are the Sigsbee, an original Chesapeake Bay skipjack. Harbor Point, to the right, is constructed on the grounds of the old chromium chemical plant whose history dates back to 1845. In the early 1980s, large quantities of chromium were being released into the harbor, causing the closure of the plant in 1985. Multiple environmental protection agencies implemented a cleanup, and in 1994, construction of a deep barrier wall more than 3 feet wide and 70 feet deep began. 2 years later, a cap consisting of natural materials and an impenetrable synthetic liner that covered 15 acres was put in place. Harbor Point is now a 27-acre mixed-use project focused on sustainability and innovation. An exciting high-profile example of the continuing story of urban renewal and reuse along the shore of Baltimore Harbor. Another chapter of the revitalization story is Oriole Park at Camden Yards, home of Major League Baseball's Baltimore Orioles. While not in view from where we are right now, you may be able to see the stadium lighting up the sky in the distance. The park was built to move the team to the downtown area from a much older stadium farther north in the city. It was the first modern facility built to look and feel like classic ballparks of the early 1900s. A trend that has continued with more than a dozen other new ballparks since. Adjacent to Oriole Park at the Camden Yards Sports Complex is M&T Bank Stadium, an outdoor stadium completed in 1998 and built specifically for the city's NFL franchise, the Baltimore Ravens. The large white tent structure is the Pier 6 Concert Pavilion, operated by Ram's Head. It's a great spot to see concerts of major recording artists and local Baltimore talents. Seven-foot Knoll Lighthouse on Pier 5 was built in 1856. It is the oldest screw-pile lighthouse in Maryland. For 133 years, it stood in the Chesapeake Bay, marking the entrance to Baltimore Harbor. After advancements in technology, the lighthouse became obsolete in 1948 and was transferred to the Baltimore Maritime Museum in 1997.
I don't know what it is.
The White Ship, U.S. Coast Guard Cutter number 37, was designed for law enforcement missions, search and rescue, and maritime patrol. By the late 1960s, the 327-foot ship became the last U.S. vessel still in commission that had seen action during the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. She was decommissioned in 1986 and donated to the city of Baltimore to serve as a memorial and museum. The National Aquarium on our right is a non-profit organization whose mission is to inspire conservation of the world's aquatic treasures. The 2,200,000 gallon aquarium is ranked as one of the nation's top 3 aquariums, featuring thousands of fish, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals living in award-winning habitats. Docked on the West Sea wall of the aquarium are the USS Torsk and Lightship Chesapeake. The Torsk was built for the U.S. Navy during World War II. During the 1950s and 60s, the 311-foot-long submarine operated primarily as a training vessel, which helped to establish her world record of 11,884 dives. The red lightship in front of the Torsk was stationed at the mouth of the bay for 40 years, until the beginning of World War II. During that time, she was converted for wartime duties, painted a battleship gray, armed with 2 cannons, and used as a patrol vessel. In 1945, her bright red hull, beacon lights, and Chesapeake Station designation were repainted, and she was once again used to guide maritime traffic in and out of the Chesapeake Bay for the following 20 years. The large sailing ship you see is the USS Constellation, the last all-sail warship built by the Navy. It was built in 1854 and was used to free slaves during the Civil War. It was a training ship for the U.S. Naval Academy from 1873 to 1893. and a World War II relief ship. In 1955, it was decommissioned, and in 1968, installed here as a museum.
Alright everybody, that's going to be the end of our narration for today. We do hope you enjoyed and learned something new about the city of Baltimore. As we're heading back into our dock, I would ask that everybody would please take a seat at this time. We do have a bit of wind today. Once we're safely tied up, and my crew has all of the boat's lines on, I'll get back on the microphone to let you guys know when it will be safe to stand up, and we'll disembark at that time. Until then, I'll throw on some music here, and we'll enjoy the last couple of minutes of our cruise.